The chains cut into Brenna's wrists as she hung suspended between the ancient gateposts, and she used the breath she might have wasted on tears to curse the mayor's name instead. "Coward!" she spat into the darkness, though Stephen Greaves and his cronies had long since retreated down the mountain road to Hollowmere. Fat, greedy coward. Her mother had taught her better language than this once, before the illness had stolen most of her words. Now, Brenna let the profanity roll off her tongue like prayers, naming every member of the town council in turn, cataloging their sins and their stupidity with equal venom. Thomas the butcher who'd looked at his boots when they dragged her past his shop, Sarah the seamstress who'd sewn the white sacrificial dress and charged her mother full price. Even Father Benedict who'd blessed her with shaking hands and wouldn't meet her eyes. The November wind cut through the thin fabric and she shivered, but she did not cry. Crying was for people who had not watched their mother waste away in a charity ward, while the town council collected tithe taxes that somehow never quite covered medical care. Crying was for people who believed the world might still be fair. She had stopped believing in fairness 3 months ago when her mother had died in a cold room, alone, while Brenna scrubbed floors at the mayor's house to pay for medicine that never came. The moon rose over the pass, full and white, and Brenna tested the chains again. Iron, old and heavy, bolted to stone that had stood here longer than the town. The tithe gate, they called it. One girl every year, chained at the dark of winter, given to the Vampire King of the Northern Court so that he would not descend on Hollowmere and bleed it dry. Or so the story went. Brenna had her doubts. She had doubts about a great many things these days, but none of that mattered because she was chained to a gate in the middle of nowhere, and something was moving in the darkness beyond the pass. She heard it first, the whisper of displaced air, the sense of presence too large to be human. Then she saw him, and every clever curse died on her tongue. He was pale as winter moonlight, his skin the color of marble, his hair a white cascade that fell past his shoulders. He wore black, tailored and modern, strange against the ancient setting, and he moved with a grace that was not quite natural, each step measured and deliberate. His eyes caught the light like a cat's, silver and cold, and when he looked at her, she felt the weight of centuries in that gaze. The Vampire King, Lucien Sovaris, the terror of the northern mountains, the immortal lord whose very name was supposed to make children behave and grown men lock their doors. He stopped 3 paces from the gate and studied her with his head tilted slightly, like a predator assessing prey. Brenna's heart hammered, but she kept her chin up. If she was going to die, she would die angry, not afraid. "Well?" she said, and her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "Are you going to eat me standing up? Or do vampires have table manners?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then something flickered across his perfect features, too quick to name. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. He moved, faster than her eye could follow, and suddenly he was beside her. She flinched despite herself, but he was not reaching for her throat. His hand touched the chain at her left wrist, and the iron simply melted, running liquid and harmless to the ground. He did the same to her right wrist, and suddenly she was falling. He caught her before she hit the stone, his arms impossibly strong, and set her on her feet with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about vampires. She stumbled, legs weak from hanging, and he steadied her with one hand on her elbow. His touch was cool through the thin dress, but not painful, not cruel. He looked at her for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face as though memorizing it. Then he turned to the empty road, to the distant lights of Hollowmere far below, and spoke in a voice that carried like smoke on the wind. "They have sent me a queen," he said, "and called her a sacrifice." Then he looked back at her, and the corner of his mouth lifted in something that was not quite a smile. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Brenna said, though her legs were shaking. "Where?" "Away from here." He shrugged out of his black coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, lined with silk, and it smelled of cedar and old books. "Unless you wish to return to your grateful village?" The bitterness in his voice matched her own. Brenna pulled the coat tighter and shook her head. "I'd rather walk into hell." "Close enough," he said, and there was definitely amusement in his voice now. Come." He did not offer his hand, but he walked slowly, matching his pace to hers as she navigated the rocky path in bare feet. The coat dragged on the ground behind her. She must look ridiculous, a scarecrow girl in a Vampire King's expensive clothes, but he did not comment on it. They walked in silence for perhaps 10 minutes, leaving the tithe gate behind, heading north into the mountains. The path grew steeper, and Brenna's feet began to bleed, but she set her teeth and kept walking. She would not complain. She would not be weak. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her. "You are injured." "I'm fine." He looked at her feet, at the dark stains on the stones, and his expression went very still. Then, before she could protest, he bent and lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "I can walk," she said. "You can bleed," he corrected. "There is a difference." She wanted to argue, but the truth was her feet hurt terribly and his arms were steady, and she was so tired. She had not slept the night before, knowing what was coming, and the weeks before that had been a blur of grief and rage and desperate, futile attempts to save her mother. "Why?" she asked, and was horrified to hear her voice crack. "Why did you call me a queen?" He did not answer immediately. He carried her up the mountain path as easily as though she were a child, his steps never faltering even on the steep ground. The moon painted everything silver and shadow, and his white hair gleamed in it like frost. "Because," he said finally, "in 23 years of this arrangement, you are the first sacrifice who looked at me with anger instead of terror, the first to speak instead of weep, the first to ask questions instead of begging for mercy. Would you have given mercy if I'd begged?" "No." His voice was flat, factual. "Mercy is not what your village bargained for." What did they bargain for? Safety. Protection from the other courts, from rogue vampires, from the creatures that hunt in these mountains. 1 life a year, given freely in exchange for the safety of hundreds. Brenna's laugh was bitter. Nothing about tonight was freely given. He looked down at her, and something in his silver eyes shifted. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it was not." They walked for another hour, up paths that grew increasingly impossible, until they reached a place where the mountain face simply opened. A gate, modern and seamless, set into stone. He touched it with one hand, and it swung open silently. Beyond was a world Brenna had not imagined. The court was built into the mountain itself, a palace of stone and steel and glass that defied architecture and gravity in equal measure. Chandeliers hung in vast caverns, lighting rooms carved from living rock. Modern furniture sat beside ancient tapestries. Technology hummed quietly in the walls, climate control and electricity, while candles burned in silver sconces as though it were still the 18th century. Vampires moved through the halls, pale and beautiful and terrible, and they stopped to stare as Lucien carried her through. He ignored them all. He carried her up a sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced immortals, and finally through a door into a room that made her breath catch. It was enormous, with a ceiling that soared 30 feet overhead and windows that looked out over the mountain range. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in midnight blue silk. There was a fireplace with a fire already burning, thick carpets, a sitting area with chairs that looked older than the country. And through an open door, she glimpsed a bathroom tiled in white marble, with a tub deep enough to swim in. Lucien set her down on the edge of the bed, gentle as though she might break, and stepped back. "This is your room," he said. "You may lock the door if you wish. No one will enter without your permission, not even me." Brenna stared at him. "You're not going to kill me?" "No." "Drink my blood?" "Not without your consent." "Then what am I doing here?" He was silent for a moment, and something old and sad moved behind his eyes. "Surviving," he said finally. "Which is more than your village intended." He moved to leave, but she called after him, her voice sharp. "Wait. I don't understand any of this. What happens now? Can I leave? Am I a prisoner? You called me a queen, but you treat me like a guest, and I don't know what that means." Lucien stopped in the doorway, his back to her. His shoulders were tense beneath his white shirt. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. You may leave whenever you wish. The gate will open for you. You are not a prisoner. But if you return to Hollowmere, your village will likely kill you." The words hit like a fist. "What?" He turned then, and his face was expressionless in the way that meant he was hiding something. "The tithe must be paid. If you return alive, they will assume the bargain is broken. They will believe the Vampire King rejected their offering. Fear will make them desperate, and desperate humans do terrible things. You're saying they'll kill me to satisfy a bargain you don't even want?" "I am saying humans are more monstrous than they believe when they are afraid." Brenna felt the fight drain out of her. She looked down at her bloody feet, at the ridiculous white dress, at the opulent room that was apparently hers now. "So I'm trapped." "You are alive," Lucien said quietly. "Sleep. We will speak more tomorrow." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Brenna was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, trying to make sense of everything. Then, because there was nothing else to do, she got up and locked the door. She ran a bath, hot enough to scald, and scrubbed the dirt and blood and sacrificial paint from her skin. She found clothes in the wardrobe, modern and expensive and exactly her size, which should have been impossible, but nothing about tonight made sense anyway. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, she crawled into the enormous bed and pulled the silk covers over her head. She had expected nightmares. Instead, she slept dreamlessly, deeply, and woke to winter sunlight slanting through the windows and the smell of coffee. Someone had left a breakfast tray on the table by the window. Coffee, fresh bread, cheese, fruit. A note in elegant script that said simply, "Ring the bell when you wake. We should talk." Brenna ate mechanically, her mind spinning. Then she found the bell, a small silver thing on the mantel, and rang it. Lucien arrived within minutes, knocking softly before entering at her call. He looked exactly as he had the night before, perfect and pale and untouched by time. But in the daylight that streamed through the windows, she noticed things she had missed in the moonlight. The shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he stood carefully away from the windows, as though the sun pained him even through glass. "You are well?" he asked. "I'm alive," she echoed his words from last night. "Which apparently counts for something." He almost smiled. "Indeed." He gestured to the sitting area. "May I?" She nodded, and they sat in chairs facing each other across a small table. He moved with such control, such precision, that she wondered if he ever allowed himself to be careless, to be spontaneous, to be anything other than perfectly composed. "I owe you explanations," he said. "Ask." Brenna had 1,000 questions, but she started with the most pressing. "Why did you call me a queen?" "Because you are one, if you choose to be." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him choose his words with care. "The tithe is a very old bargain, made between the northern court and the human settlements in these mountains. One life, given at the dark of winter, in exchange for protection. The human who is given becomes part of the court. Most choose death quickly because they cannot bear what they have lost. Some accept turning and become vampires in their own right. A very few over the centuries have become more. More? Consorts, advisors, queens." His silver eyes met hers steadily. "The Northern Court has been without a queen for 90 years. I have been without a queen for 90 years. Understanding dawned slowly, impossibly. "You want me to marry you. I want you to choose freely what your village tried to steal from you, your life, your future, your power." He leaned forward slightly, intense. "If you become my queen, you will have resources, protection, influence. You could do anything, change anything, including perhaps the very bargain that brought you here. And if I say no, then you are still under my protection as a guest of the court for as long as you wish to stay. When you are ready, I will help you build a new life, somewhere far from Hollowmere. A new name, money, education, whatever you need." It was too much, too generous, too strange, too overwhelming. Brenna stood abruptly and paced to the window, staring out at the impossible view. Mountains stretched to the horizon, snow-capped and ancient, beautiful and merciless. "Why me?" she asked the glass. "You said 23 years. That's 22 other girls. Why am I different?" Behind her, Lucien was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable, and it shocked her more than anything else had. "Because you were angry," he said. "Because you fought back even when you had already lost. Because when I cut your chains you did not thank me. You asked me about table manners." A pause. "Because in 247 years of existence, you are the first person who made me laugh." She turned to face him, startled. He was still sitting in the chair, hands folded in his lap, expression carefully neutral again. But there was something in his eyes, some flicker of real feeling beneath the ancient composure. "I didn't hear you laugh," she said. "I did not say you heard it." They looked at each other across the room, Vampire King and Sacrificial Girl, and something passed between them that Brenna could not name. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. The acknowledgement of two people who had both learned that the world was cruel and unfair, and had both decided to be angry about it rather than broken. "I need time," Brenna said finally, "to think, to understand all this." "Of course." Lucien stood, fluid and graceful. "The court is open to you. Explore as you wish. I have instructed everyone that you are to be treated as an honored guest. If you need anything, ring the bell." He moved toward the door, but she stopped him with a question. "Lucien?" He paused, and she noticed the way his shoulders tensed slightly when she used his name. "Why did you melt my chains? You could have just unlocked them." His hand rested on the doorframe and he did not turn around. "Because chains should not exist," he said quietly. "And if I had the power to unmake them all, I would." Then he was gone, and Brenna was left alone with her thoughts and a wardrobe full of expensive clothes and a future that suddenly had possibilities instead of just an ending. She spent the day exploring, because sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting impossible choices. The court was vast, a labyrinth of modern luxury and ancient history woven together. She found a library that made her gasp, 3 stories of books in a dozen languages, with sliding ladders and reading nooks and a ceiling painted with stars. She found a music room with instruments from across centuries. She found a garden, impossibly green, growing under artificial sunlight in a cavern deep in the mountain. And everywhere she went, vampires paused to watch her pass. They were beautiful and terrible, every one of them, pale-skinned and sharp-eyed and ancient. Some nodded to her with careful courtesy. Others simply stared. None approached her, though she could feel their curiosity like a physical weight. In the library, she met a vampire woman with white hair braided in an intricate crown and eyes like amber. The woman was reading a modern thriller, incongruous against her Renaissance-era dress, and she looked up when Brenna entered. "You are the new sacrifice," the woman said. It was not a question. "I suppose I am." "Interesting." The woman set her book aside and studied Brenna with unnerving intensity. "I am Valentina. I have been with this court for 312 years, and I have never seen Lucien bring a sacrifice home before." Brenna blinked. "Never? But the tithe has been going on for decades." "Oh, the tithe has been going on," Valentina agreed. "But Lucien stopped collecting it personally 93 years ago. He sends others now, members of the court who are young enough to still enjoy the hunt. They bring the sacrifices here, and Lucien grants them the choice: turn or die swiftly. Most choose death. A few choose turning and join the court. But Lucien himself has not gone to the tithe gate since—" She stopped abruptly, and something like pain crossed her face. "Since what?" "Since the last queen died," Valentina said softly. 90 years ago this winter." Brenna's heart clenched. What happened to her? "That is not my story to tell." Valentina picked up her book again, clearly dismissing her. But you might ask yourself why a vampire king who has avoided the tithe gate for nearly a century suddenly decided to go himself on the one night you were chained there. The words haunted Brenna for the rest of the day. She wanted to find Lucien, to demand answers, but he was nowhere in the court. Valentina told her, when pressed, that the king spent his days in the deep levels, in rooms where the sun could not reach even by accident, handling the business of ruling an immortal court. "He will surface at nightfall," Valentina said. "He always does." So Brenna waited. She ate dinner alone in her room, food that appeared on silent trays carried by human servants who would not meet her eyes. She bathed again, because there was nothing else to do, and dressed in the nicest of the clothes provided, a deep green dress that fit perfectly and made her feel almost beautiful. Night fell, and she heard movement in the halls, voices and laughter, and the sound of an immortal court coming to life. She left her room and followed the noise, down corridors and staircases, until she found herself at the entrance to an enormous hall. The throne room, she realized. It was medieval and modern at once, with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that depicted battles between vampires and humans, between courts, between ancient things she had no names for. The floor was polished black marble. At the far end, on a dais of white stone, sat a throne of silver and iron, and on that throne sat Lucien. He wore formal clothes now, black and severe, with a high collar and silver clasps. His white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features, the inhuman perfection of his bone structure. He looked every inch a king, powerful and remote and beautiful in a way that hurt to see. Around him, the court had gathered. Dozens of vampires, perhaps 100, all dressed in their finest, all watching as one of their number approached the throne to present some petition or grievance. Brenna stood in the doorway, suddenly aware that she did not belong here, that she was human and mortal and desperately out of her depth. Then Lucien's eyes found hers across the crowded room, and everything else ceased to matter. He stood in one fluid motion, silencing the vampire who had been speaking mid-sentence. The entire court turned to see what had captured their king's attention, and Brenna felt the weight of 100 immortal gazes. "Brenna!" Lucien's voice carried across the hall, formal but not cold. "Join me." It was not a request. Brenna crossed the hall with her head high, aware of every eye on her, every whispered comment. She climbed the dais steps and stopped beside the throne, uncertain. Lucien gestured to a second chair beside his own, smaller but no less ornate, that she was certain had not been there a moment ago. "Sit." She sat, and tried not to think about what it meant, the sacrificial girl sitting beside the vampire king in front of his entire court. Lucien resumed his seat and looked out at the assembly. "Continue," he said to the vampire who had been speaking. Court business proceeded around her, and Brenna tried to follow it. Disputes over hunting territories, reports from the borders with other vampire courts, a request for permission to turn a dying human. Lucien listened to it all with perfect attention, asking sharp questions, rendering judgments that seemed fair even when they were harsh. He was, Brenna realized, a good king, not cruel, not capricious. He ruled with intelligence and something that looked almost like compassion, though she suspected he would not call it that. The court session lasted hours. Finally, as midnight approached, Lucien dismissed the assembly with a gesture. The vampires filed out in careful order of precedence, and more than a few cast curious glances at Brenna as they passed. When they were alone, Lucien turned to her. "You came. You told me the court was open to me. I did not think you would attend session. Most humans find it disturbing." "Most humans weren't chained to a gate and carried off by vampires," Brenna pointed out. "I'm already disturbed." That almost smile again, the one that softened his severe features. "Fair enough." Brenna took a breath and asked the question that had been burning in her all day. "Why did you go to the gate yourself? Valentina said you haven't collected the tithe personally in 90 years. Lucien's expression shuddered immediately. He stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the mountain night. "Valentina talks too much. She said your queen died 90 years ago. She did. How? Fire." The word was clipped, hard. Humans burned the summer court while we slept, trying to kill the Vampire King of the South. She was visiting, negotiating a trade agreement. She burned with the rest. Horror washed through Brenna. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. 90 years is not long for a vampire. He looked at her then, surprised. No, he admitted. It is not. You loved her. I did. He turned back to the window. Ilara was fierce and brilliant and unafraid. She was human once, from a village much like yours. She chose turning, chose to become vampire, chose to be my queen. And then humans murdered her for the crime of existing. Brenna heard the pain beneath the carefully controlled words, the old grief that had not faded with time. Is that why you hate us? I do not hate humans. You don't trust them. No, Lucien agreed. I do not. Then why bring me here? Why offer me a crown? If you think humans are monsters, why make one your queen? He was silent for a long time, so long that Brenna thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was very soft. Because 90 years ago, I swore I would never take another queen, that I would rule alone, untouched, unattached, so that loss could never destroy me again. I have kept that vow through wars and politics and centuries of eligible vampire women who would have gladly sat on the throne beside me. And then you, a human girl in chains, looked at me with pure fury and asked about table manners, and I felt something I thought had died with Ilara. What? He turned to face her, and his silver eyes were blazing with something intense and desperate and real. Hope, he said. I felt hope. The word hung between them, impossibly fragile. Brenna's heart was pounding, and she did not know if it was fear or something else entirely. I don't understand, she whispered. Neither do I, Lucien admitted. But I went to that gate because for the first time in 90 years I wanted to. Because I woke that morning and thought perhaps it was time to stop hiding in my grief. And then I found you. And you were nothing like what I expected and everything I did not know I needed. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and dropped to one knee before her, putting them at eye level. This close, she could see the silver flecks in his irises, the impossible smoothness of his skin. He did not touch her, but his hands were fisted at his sides as though restraining himself. I am not asking you to love me, he said quietly. I am not even asking you to stay. But I am asking you to consider the possibility that your life could be more than survival. That you could have power and purpose and a future worth fighting for. As your queen. As yourself, he corrected. The crown is just a symbol. You are already more than they tried to make you. Brenna's throat was tight. I need more time. Take all the time you need. He stood, stepped back, gave her space to breathe. I have waited 90 years. I can wait longer. He left her there in the empty throne room, surrounded by stained glass and history, and Brenna put her face in her hands and tried not to cry. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Brenna explored the court, learning its secrets and its politics. She spent hours in the library reading histories of the vampire courts and treaties between humans and immortals. She discovered that the tithe was indeed a very old bargain, dating back 300 years, but the details were frustratingly vague. Valentina became something like a friend, though the vampire woman was prickly and strange. She told Brenna stories about the court, about the politics and personalities, about Lucien's history as a king. He was turned in 1779, Valentina said one evening as they sat in the garden. During the war. He was a scholar, a doctor, trying to save lives in an impossible situation. His maker saw potential in him and gave him eternity whether he wanted it or not. Did he want it? At first, no. He spent decades trying to atone, to use his immortality to help humans. He opened clinics, funded hospitals, saved thousands of lives. Valentina's smile was sad. And then humans discovered what he was and tried to kill him for it, over and over, until he stopped trying to save them and started simply trying to survive them. Until Ilara, Valentina agreed. She reminded him that humans could be more than their fear. And when she died, that lesson died with her. But he's trying again, Brenna said softly. With me. Yes. Valentina looked at her with those unsettling amber eyes. The question is, will you let him? Brenna did not know how to answer that. She saw Lucien every evening when he held court or dined with his advisors or simply walked the halls of his domain. He was always courteous, always careful to give her space. But she felt his attention on her like sunlight, constant and warming and impossible to ignore. He did not press her, did not ask again about the crown or the future. But small things appeared in her room. Books he thought she might enjoy, a warmer cloak for walking the mountain paths, a music box that played a melody she had hummed once in the garden. Never anything ostentatious, never anything that demanded gratitude, just small kindnesses, given freely. She began to understand that this was how Lucien loved, quietly, through actions rather than words, protecting and providing without ever asking for acknowledgement. It terrified her, how much she was starting to care. 2 weeks after her arrival, Brenna found the archive. She had been searching for a particular book Valentina had mentioned, something about the history of human vampire treaties, and had taken a wrong turn in the library's lower levels. Behind a shelf of old tax records, she found a door, unlocked, that led to a spiral staircase descending into the mountain. Curiosity overcame caution. She followed the stairs down until she emerged in a vast chamber carved from living rock. Filing cabinets lined the walls, modern and climate-controlled, and the air smelled of old paper and preservatives. The court archive, she realized, the official records. She should have left, should have respected the privacy of these documents. But something made her stay, made her start opening drawers, made her search for records of the tithe. She found them in a cabinet marked Human Treaties, 1700 present. Leather-bound ledgers documenting every tithe for 300 years, names, dates, outcomes, a history written in blood and sacrifice. Brenna's hands shook as she paged through them. So many names, so many lives ended or transformed. She found Ilara's entry, dated 1848. Accepted turning, became queen, married to Lucien Sovaris in 1850. Died 1935 in the burning of the Southern Summer Court. Brenna traced the careful script with one finger, thinking of the Vampire King's ancient grief. Then she turned the page, and everything changed. The ledger after Ilara's death showed 22 more sacrifices, one for each year. But 91 years ago, the entries stopped. The last one was dated 1935, the same year Ilara died. After that, nothing. No names, no dates, no sacrifices recorded. For 91 years, according to the court's own records, there had been no tithe. Brenna's heart was pounding. She grabbed the next ledger, the one that should have contained the recent decades. It was there, on the shelf, but when she opened it, the pages were blank. Not lost, not destroyed. Simply never filled in. She pulled out another drawer, searching for correspondence with Hollowmere. Found letters from the court to the village, routine and bureaucratic, dated every few years. The most recent was from 15 years ago, a simple acknowledgement of borders and hunting rights. No mention of the tithe at all. Cold understanding washed over her. She went back to the oldest records, to the original treaty from 1726. Read it carefully, twice, 3 times. The tithe had been negotiated between the Northern Court and the original settlement, yes. One life given freely at the dark of winter, in exchange for protection and peace. But the treaty had a duration, 200 years. It had expired in 1926, 10 years before Ilara's death. 99 years ago. There was no tithe. There had not been a tithe for nearly a century. The treaty was done, fulfilled, ended. Which meant everything the mayor had told Hollowmere was a lie. Brenna sat down hard on the cold floor, her mind racing. Stephen Greaves had invented the tithe, or perhaps his father had, or his grandfather. They had used the old story to control the town, to collect taxes for protection, to maintain power. And the court had never known, because the court had not cared, because Lucien had stopped paying attention to human villages after Ilara died. 23 girls. 23 lives given to satisfy a bargain that did not exist. Fury rose in Brenna's chest. White-hot and cleansing, she stood and grabbed the ledgers, the treaty, the letters, evidence, proof. She would expose this. She would burn Stephen Greaves's lies to the ground. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time and went straight to the throne room. It was empty, the court not yet assembled for the evening session. She found a servant and demanded to see Lucien immediately. He arrived within minutes, concern sharp on his face. "Brenna, what's wrong?" She thrust the ledgers at him. "Read these." He took them, frowning, and began to page through the entries. She watched understanding dawn on his face, watched shock and then anger tighten his features. "There is no tithe," he said flatly. "There hasn't been for 99 years. The treaty expired and no one renewed it because you stopped caring and the humans kept lying." Lucien set the ledgers down very carefully, his hands shaking slightly. 23 lives. 23 girls sent to their deaths because of a fraud. "I killed them." His voice was hollow. "I granted them the choice, turn or die, and most chose death. And all of it was based on a lie. They did not need to die. The bargain was already fulfilled." "You didn't know," Brenna said fiercely. "The court didn't know. But Hollowmere knew, or at least the mayor's family knew. They've been collecting taxes for protection you already provided, using the threat of vampire attack to keep people obedient." Lucien looked at her, and his eyes were blazing silver. "What do you want to do? Expose them. Make them face what they've done. Make them pay back every penny they stole. Make them free every family they've terrorized with this lie. If you do that, you put yourself in danger." His voice was hard. "The mayor will not simply accept exposure. He will fight back, and you are the evidence that his fraud existed. You are the girl who came back from the dead. I don't care. I do." He stepped closer, intensity rolling off him in waves. "Brenna, if you return to that village, they will kill you to protect their secret. Then help me." She grabbed his hand without thinking, felt the coolness of his skin, the strength in his fingers. "You're the Vampire King. You have power, resources, armies if you need them. Help me burn this fraud to the ground." For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at their joined hands as though seeing something miraculous. Then he lifted his gaze to hers, and she saw something fierce and possessive in his expression, something that made her breath catch. "If I do this," he said softly, "if I help you fight your village and expose their lies, it will be an act of war. The humans will see it as the vampire court interfering in their governance. Other courts will see it as weakness, caring too much about human justice. I will make enemies, powerful ones, for the sake of one girl's vengeance." "Then don't," Brenna said, though the words cost her. "I'll find another way." "I did not say I would not help you." His hand tightened on hers. "I said it would cost me, and I want you to understand that I do not care. You want justice? I will give you justice. You want vengeance? I will hand you the mayor's head on a silver platter. You want to burn the lie down and salt the earth where it grew? I will bring the matches and watch it with you." "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Because you asked," Lucien said simply. "Because in 247 years, no one has ever asked me to fight for what was right instead of what was politically expedient. Because you are furious and righteous, and you make me remember what it was like to believe the world could be better." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture from another century, courtly and devastating. "Because you are my queen in everything but name, and I would raise cities for you if you asked it." Brenna's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "I'm not your queen." "Not yet," he agreed. "But you will be." It was not arrogance in his voice. It was certainty, quiet and absolute, and it should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Help me," she said again. "Please." "Always," Lucien promised, and she believed him. They spent the next 3 days planning. Lucien called in his advisors, the senior members of the court who handled political and legal matters. Valentina was among them, and a sharp-eyed vampire named Casimir, who served as the court's liaison with the human world. The fraud is clear, Casimir said, studying the documents Brenna had found. The treaty expired, the tithe was not renewed, and the village has been collecting money under false pretenses. In human law, this is theft and extortion at minimum. Can we prosecute? Brenna asked. We can expose, Casimir said carefully. But prosecution would mean involving human authorities, and they will be reluctant to act against an entire town council on the word of vampires. Then we need human witnesses, Brenna said. People from Hollowmere who can testify to the taxes, the threats, the way the mayor used fear of the vampire court to control them. They will be afraid to speak, Valentina pointed out. Small towns protect their own, especially against outsiders. Not if the outsider is one of their own. Brenna looked at Lucien. I need to go back, not to stay, but to talk to people. There are families who lost daughters to this fraud, mothers who watched their children die for nothing. If I can reach them, if I can show them the truth, some of them will speak. Absolutely not, Lucien said flatly. It is too dangerous. It's the only way. Then I go with you. A vampire king appearing in Hollowmere, that will go well. They stared at each other across the table, stubborn and matched. Finally, Valentina laughed, breaking the tension. You are both idiots, she said cheerfully. Brenna cannot go alone because the mayor will kill her. Lucien cannot go because his presence will start a panic. So we send someone else with her, someone human, or at least human appearing, who can provide protection without revealing the court's involvement. I can pass for human, Casimir offered, and I am old enough to be very hard to kill. Lucien looked like he wanted to argue, but Valentina fixed him with a stern look. She is right, and you know it. The fraud must be exposed, and it must be exposed in a way that the humans cannot dismiss as vampire manipulation. That means Brenna must be the face of this, and she must have human support. Slowly, reluctantly, Lucien nodded. 3 days, he said. You have 3 days to make contact and gather witnesses. If you are not back by then, I am coming for you with the entire court. Deal, Brenna said. They left the next evening, Brenna and Casimir, traveling in a sleek modern car down the mountain roads. Casimir was good company, witty and irreverent, and he told her stories about the court that made her laugh despite her nervousness. Lucien is insufferable when he is in love, Casimir said as they drove through the darkness. He has been stalking the halls at all hours, snapping at everyone, moving your breakfast tray 6 inches to the left and then 6 inches back because he cannot decide which is better. Brenna blushed. He's not in love with me. Child, I have known Lucien for 160 years. I was there when he met Alara, and I watched him fall then. He is falling now, exactly the same way, except this time he is terrified it will end the same. I won't die in a fire, Brenna said. No, Casimir agreed, but there are many ways to lose someone you love, and Lucien has learned them all. They reached Hollowmere near midnight. The town was dark, shuttered, fearful as always. Casimir parked the car on the outskirts and looked at Brenna seriously. I will be close, he said. If there is trouble, scream and I will come. But try not to be seen with me. You are the lost girl returned, a miracle or a ghost. Use that. Brenna nodded and slipped into the darkness. She went first to her old house, the tiny cottage where she had lived with her mother. It was empty now, dark and cold, already falling into disrepair. She let herself in through the broken back door and stood in the kitchen where her mother had baked bread and laughed and slowly wasted away. Then she went to the neighbors. Mrs. Chen answered the door in her nightgown, candle in hand, and nearly dropped it when she saw Brenna's face. Blessed saints, she whispered, you're alive. I'm alive, Brenna agreed. Can I come in? They talked for an hour. Brenna told her story carefully, editing out the vampires where she could, focusing on the fraud. She showed Mrs. Chen copies of the treaty documents Casimir had prepared, proof that the tithe had ended decades ago. All those girls, Mrs. Chen said, tears streaming down her face. All those taxes. My daughter's tuition money went to the tithe fund. She could have gone to university, but we couldn't afford it because we were paying for protection we didn't need. Will you testify? Brenna asked. If I can get authorities here, investigators, will you tell them what you've told me? Mrs. Chen hesitated, fear and anger warring on her face. Finally, she nodded. Yes, for my daughter, for all the daughters. Brenna visited 6 more houses that night. 5 agreed to speak. 1 slammed the door in her face. By dawn, she had a list of witnesses and a plan, but news traveled fast in a small town. By the time she met Casimir back at the car, the mayor already knew she was there. Stephen Greaves was waiting for them at the town hall, flanked by 6 men with rifles. Not the town council. Hunters, Brenna realized with cold dread. He had called vampire hunters. Brenna Ashford, the mayor said, his voice carrying across the empty square. The girl who came back from the dead. Or should I say, the vampire's thrall. I'm not a thrall, Brenna said steadily. She stepped forward, keeping Casimir behind her. I'm a witness to your fraud. Fraud? The mayor's laugh was ugly. Careful, girl. Slander is a serious accusation. So is theft, extortion, murder by deception. Brenna pulled out the papers, held them high. The tithe ended 99 years ago. The treaty was fulfilled. Every tax you collected, every girl you sent to die, all of it was based on a lie you've been telling for a century. Murmurs from the growing crowd. People were emerging from their houses now, drawn by the commotion. Brenna saw Mrs. Chen, saw other faces she recognized. Allies, she hoped. Those are vampire documents, Greaves spat. Forgeries. Everyone knows vampires can't be trusted. These are certified records from the Northern Court Archive, Casimir said, stepping forward. His voice was calm but carried an edge of danger. I am Casimir Thorne, legal advisor to King Lucien Sovaris, and I can assure you, every page is authentic. A vampire! One of the hunters raised his rifle. She brought vampires to our town. I brought proof, Brenna shouted over the rising panic. Proof that your mayor has been stealing from you for decades. Proof that the girls who died didn't need to. Proof that you've been living in fear of a threat that didn't exist. Lies! Greaves gestured sharply and the hunters moved forward. She's been turned, can't you see? She's one of them now. We have to finish what the king should have done. Everything happened very fast. The hunters raised their weapons. Casimir moved, inhumanly quick, putting himself between Brenna and the guns. Someone screamed. And then fire bloomed in the night, bright and terrible. The hunters had brought more than bullets. They had brought fire, the ancient weapon against vampires. Molotov cocktails arced through the air and Casimir cursed and grabbed Brenna, pulling her back as flames erupted across the square. Run! He shouted and shoved her toward the side street. Brenna ran. Behind her she heard gunshots, screams, Casimir's voice raised in fury. She clutched the papers to her chest and fled into the narrow streets of Hollowmere, the town that had sacrificed her and now wanted her dead. She made it 3 blocks before they cornered her. 2 hunters, both armed, blocking the alley ahead and behind. Brenna backed against a wall, breathing hard, looking for escape and finding none. Should have stayed dead, girl, one of them said, and raised his gun. Then a shadow dropped from the rooftop and the world became teeth and fury. Lucien was there, white hair flying, eyes blazing silver fire. He moved like violence incarnate, disarming one hunter with a casual flick that sent the man's rifle clattering away. The second hunter fired and Lucien simply was not there anymore, moving too fast to track, reappearing behind the man and striking him down with a blow that crushed bone. It was over in seconds. Both hunters unconscious on the ground. Lucien standing over them, breathing hard, looking more dangerous than Brenna had ever seen him. Then he turned to her, and the fury drained from his face, replaced by desperate concern. Are you hurt? No, Brenna's voice cracked. You came. Of course I came. He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She could feel him shaking. Did you think I would not? The moment Casimir sent word there was trouble, I was already moving. 3 days, you said. I could not even give you 3 hours. Brenna clung to him, papers crumpling between them, and felt something inside her chest unlock. You came for me. I will always come for you, Lucien said fiercely. He pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, his silver eyes searching hers. Always, Brenna, no matter where you are, no matter the danger, I will come. And then, because the world was ending and nothing mattered except this moment, Brenna kissed him. He froze for a heartbeat, shocked. Then he kissed her back with a century of longing, deep and desperate and achingly gentle. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, feeling the coolness of his skin, the strength in his arms, the way he held her like she was precious beyond measure. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. We should run, Brenna whispered. The hunters are no longer your concern. Lucien's voice was pure steel. He looked toward the square, where fire still burned. The mayor made a choice tonight. He attacked a member of my court under flag of peace. He hired hunters to kill vampires on neutral ground. These are acts of war, and I will answer them as such. Lucien, wait. But he was already moving, pulling her with him, striding back toward the square with lethal purpose. They emerged from the alley to chaos. More hunters had arrived, and they had Casimir pinned down behind an overturned cart. The crowd was screaming, running, and Greaves stood in the center of it all, shouting orders. Enough, Lucien said, and though he did not raise his voice, it cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone froze, turned, saw the Vampire King standing in their town square with murder in his eyes. You dare, Lucien said softly, walking forward. The hunters raised their weapons but did not fire, terrified. You dare to attack my people, in my territory, under my protection. This is human land, Greaves shouted, but his voice shook. You have no authority here. The treaty that gave you independence expired 99 years ago, Lucien said. You chose not to renew it, which means, Mayor Greaves, that this town falls under the Northern Court's jurisdiction by default. It always has. You simply did not know it, because I chose to ignore you. He stopped in the center of the square, firelight painting his pale skin gold and terrible. But I am not ignoring you anymore. You have committed theft, extortion, and fraud against your own people. You have killed or attempted to kill 23 girls in my name, without my consent or knowledge, and tonight you attempted to murder the woman I have claimed as queen. Gasps from the crowd. Brenna felt heat flood her face, but Lucien continued, relentless. By the authority of the Northern Court, by the laws of vampire and human alike, I declare Stephen Greaves and his co-conspirators under arrest. You will be tried in human court with human law for your crimes, and you will face justice. You can't do this! Greaves lunged for a hunter's dropped rifle, but Casimir was there, faster, kicking it away. Actually, Casimir said pleasantly, he can. I took the liberty of contacting the state police before we arrived. They are very interested in charges of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit murder. They should arrive within the hour. Lucien looked at the crowd, at the frightened faces of the people Greaves had terrorized. The taxes you paid are not owed. The tithe is ended and was ended decades ago. The Vampire King does not demand sacrifice from Hollowmere. He never did, not after the original treaty expired. You have been lied to, and those lies killed your daughters. But that ends tonight. He held out his hand to Brenna. She took it, stepped forward to stand beside him. Together they faced the town that had sacrificed her and the man who had built his power on lies. Brenna Ashford was the last tithe, Lucien said quietly, and she will be the first queen. What was meant to end her life has instead given her power, and she will use that power to ensure this never happens again. The mayor looked at them with hatred and desperation. He grabbed for a weapon, something, anything. Casimir caught his wrist and twisted, gentle but implacable, and forced him to his knees. It's over, Brenna said, looking down at the man who had sent her to die. Your fraud, your power, your lies, all of it, over. In the distance, sirens wailed. The state police coming to clean up a century of corruption. The townspeople parted to let them through, and Brenna watched as Greaves and his hunters were led away in handcuffs. Mrs. Chen approached slowly, nervously, and touched Brenna's hand. Thank you, she whispered, "for coming back, for being brave." Others came forward then, one by one, apologies and gratitude and promises to testify. The tide had turned. Truth had won, at least for tonight. As dawn approached, Lucien drew Brenna away from the crowd, back toward the car where Casimir waited. "We should go," he said quietly. "The sun is coming." Brenna looked back at Hollowmere one last time. The town that had raised her and betrayed her, that had killed her mother through negligence and tried to kill her through cruelty. She felt no love for it, but also no hatred. Just a tired sort of closure. "I'm ready," she said. They drove back to the court as the sun rose, painting the mountains gold and rose. Lucien sat in the back seat with Brenna, his hand wrapped around hers, his thumb tracing patterns on her wrist. He did not speak, but his touch said everything. Casimir glanced at them in the rearview mirror and smiled. "So," he said, "Queen, that is quite the promotion from sacrifice." "I haven't said yes," Brenna pointed out. "You kissed him in an alley during a crisis," Casimir said. "That is practically a marriage proposal in vampire terms." Brenna blushed, and Lucien gave Casimir a look that would have killed a mortal. "Focus on driving." "I am an excellent driver," Casimir said. "I am also an excellent romantic, which is why I am not asking invasive questions about your intentions toward our king." Casimir. Driving, focusing, silently enjoying the schadenfreude. Despite everything, Brenna laughed. Lucien looked at her, startled, and then something in his expression softened. He lifted her hand to his lips again, that courtly gesture, and kissed her knuckles gently. "You were magnificent tonight," he said quietly. "Brave and fierce, and everything a queen should be." "I was terrified," Brenna admitted. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it." He hesitated, then added, "Alara used to say that." "She sounds like she was wonderful." She was. Lucien looked out at the mountains, at the rising sun he could not touch. "And she would have liked you very much." They arrived at the court as the vampires were retreating into the mountain's depths, fleeing the deadly sunlight. Lucien walked Brenna to her room, reluctant to leave her even as the sun's power grew. "Rest," he said at her door. "We can talk tonight about what comes next." "Lucien." She caught his hand before he could go. "You said you claimed me as queen in front of witnesses. Does that mean something? Legally?" "It means," he said carefully, "that you are under the protection of the crown. No vampire may harm you, and any threat against you is a threat against the court itself. But it does not bind you to me unless you choose to accept. And if I choose to accept," his silver eyes blazed with sudden hope, "then we would formalize it. A ceremony before the court. You would be granted rank and authority, resources and power. And yes, you would be my consort, my partner in ruling." "Would I have to turn, become vampire?" "Not immediately. Not ever, if you did not wish it. Human queens are rare but not unheard of." He stepped closer, intense. "Brenna, I would never force that choice on you. Whatever you decide, however you choose to live, I will support it." She thought about it, standing in the doorway of her borrowed room while the vampire king who had saved her waited for her answer. She thought about Hollowmere and the years of powerlessness, of watching her mother die because they could not afford care, of being chained to a gate and left for dead. She thought about the library and the garden and Valentina's friendship. She thought about the way Lucien looked at her like she was precious, the way he had dropped everything to save her, the way he had given her justice when no one else would. "Ask me again," she said. "Properly." Understanding dawned on his face. He dropped to one knee before her, there in the hallway with the sun rising and the court asleep around them, and took her hand in both of his. "Brenna Ashford," he said quietly, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my queen?" "Yes," Brenna said, and watched joy break across his face like sunrise. "Yes, Lucien, I will be your queen." He stood and pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he was smiling, really smiling, and it transformed him from beautiful to radiant. "I will make you happy," he promised. "Every day of your life, however long or short, I will make you happy." "Just love me," Brenna said. "That's all I need." "I already do," Lucien said. "I have since the moment you asked about table manners." The ceremony was held 3 weeks later, once the chaos in Hollowmere had settled and the state investigation was well underway. Mayor Greaves and 4 members of his council were facing criminal charges. The families who had lost daughters were receiving restitution from seized funds, and Brenna's name had been cleared, the town grudgingly acknowledging that she had been the victim, not the villain. The throne room was packed with vampires from across the northern court, all dressed in their finest, all gathered to witness their king take a queen. Brenna wore a gown of midnight blue silk that Valentina had helped her choose, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. Her hair was pinned up with crystal combs, and around her throat was a necklace of diamonds and sapphires that had belonged to Alara. "She would want you to have it," Lucien had said when he gave it to her. "A gift from one queen to another." Now she stood beside him before the assembled court, holding his hand, while Valentina conducted the ceremony in her role as High Advisor. "The northern court has been without a queen for 90 years, Valentina said, her voice carrying through the vast space. "Tonight we remedy that absence. Brenna Ashford, human and free, do you accept the crown and all it entails?" "I do," Brenna said clearly. "Do you swear to serve the court with wisdom, to rule with justice, to protect those who cannot protect themselves?" "I swear." "Do you accept Lucien Sovaris as your partner in all things, to stand beside him in darkness and in light, in peace and in war?" Brenna looked at Lucien, at the Vampire King who had saved her and trusted her and loved her. "I do." Valentina smiled and lifted a crown from its cushion. It was delicate and ancient, worked in silver and set with moonstones, and it had not been worn since Alara's death. She placed it gently on Brenna's head. "Then, by the authority of the Northern Court, I name you Queen. Rise, Your Majesty, and be recognized." The court erupted in applause. Vampires who had been alive for centuries, who had seen empires rise and fall, all acknowledging a human girl as their queen. Brenna felt the weight of the crown, literal and metaphorical, and lifted her chin to meet their gazes. Lucien raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, his eyes shining. "My queen," he said softly, just for her. "My king," she replied, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she had not expected to feel again after her mother's death. Hope. The celebration lasted all night. There was music and dancing, vampires whirling through elaborate steps that Lucien patiently taught her. There were toasts and speeches, Casimir telling embarrassing stories about Lucien's youth that made the king groan and everyone else laugh. There was food, exquisite and beautifully prepared, and wine older than countries. And through it all, Lucien stayed at her side, his hand in hers, his attention focused on her, as though she were the only person in the room. "Happy?" he asked as midnight approached. "Terrified," Brenna admitted. "But yes, happy." "Good." He pulled her into another dance, slower this time, intimate. "You know, you never actually said you love me." "Didn't I?" "No, you said yes to being queen. You said you wanted me to love you, but you never said you loved me in return." Brenna pretended to consider this. "Oversight." "Brenna." He spun her gently, bringing her back against his chest, his lips close to her ear. "Say it." "Make me," she challenged, feeling bold. His arms tightened around her and his voice dropped to a whisper that made her shiver. "I could. I have 247 years of experience in persuasion." "Promises, promises." He laughed, low and warm, and turned her to face him. "I love you," he said seriously, all teasing gone. "I love your courage and your fury and the way you look at the world and decide to change it. I love that you made me feel again after 90 years of ice. I love you, Brenna Ashford, and I will love you until the stars burn out." Her throat was tight with emotion. I love you too, she whispered. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you protect people without asking for thanks. I love that you gave me justice when no one else would. I love that you see me, really see me, not as a sacrifice or a victim, but as a person who can be powerful. She touched his face gently. I love you, Lucien Sovaris. I think I have since you melted my chains. He kissed her then, deep and sweet, in front of the entire court. And the vampires, ancient and cynical and jaded, applauded like it was the most romantic thing they had ever seen. The first year of Brenna's reign was chaos and learning and slow, steady change. She established new treaties with the human settlements in the mountains, fair agreements that did not require blood or sacrifice. She opened negotiations with other vampire courts, using her human perspective to bridge gaps that had existed for centuries. She worked with Casimir to set up a legal framework for resolving disputes between humans and vampires without violence, and through it all, Lucien was beside her, teaching her, supporting her, loving her with a devotion that never wavered. He was patient when she made mistakes, fierce when others questioned her authority, gentle in private when the weight of the crown became too much. You are doing wonderfully, he would tell her, holding her close in the enormous bed they now shared. Better than any queen we have had, vampire or human. I don't feel wonderful, Brenna would say. I feel like I'm making it up as I go. That, Lucien would reply, kissing her temple, is what ruling is. We are all making it up all the time. The trick is to pretend you have a plan. She loved him more every day. Loved the way he laughed at Casimir's jokes, the way he spent hours in the library researching solutions to problems, the way he held court with perfect justice. Loved the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, like she was a miracle he could not quite believe. 2 years into her reign, Brenna made a decision. She found Lucien in their private study, working through diplomatic correspondence, and sat down across from him. He looked up immediately, always attuned to her presence. What is it? I want to turn, Brenna said. I want to become vampire. He set down his pen very carefully. Why? Because I love you, and I want eternity with you. Because there is work to do, treaties to maintain, and I cannot do it effectively if I age and die in 60 years. Because I am tired of being fragile, of needing protection, of watching you pull away from me every dawn. She leaned forward. Because I choose it, freely, without coercion or fear. Because I want to. Lucien was silent for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face. You are certain? Completely. It will hurt, he warned. The turning. It is not easy or painless. I know. You will lose the sun. Food will taste like ash. You will outlive everyone you knew as a human. I already have, Brenna said quietly. My mother is dead. My village betrayed me. The only family I have is here, with you and Valentina and Casimir and the court. I am not losing anything. I am gaining eternity. He stood and came around the desk, pulling her into his arms. If we do this, he said seriously, I will be the one to turn you. I will not trust anyone else with something so precious. I wouldn't want anyone else. And afterwards, he continued, you will be powerful. Ancient bloodlines create strong vampires, and I am one of the oldest. You will be my equal in truth, not just in title. Good, Brenna said fiercely. I want to stand beside you, not behind you. He kissed her, soft and reverent. Then we will do it, when you are ready. Now, Brenna said, I'm ready now. So they went to their chambers, and Lucien locked the door and drew the heavy curtains. He held her close, explaining what would happen, how it would feel, what she should expect. His voice was steady, but she could feel the tension in him, the fear that something would go wrong. I trust you, she said, and meant it. I love you, he replied, and kissed her one last time as a human. The turning was agony and ecstasy, fire and ice, death and rebirth all at once. She felt her human heart stop and her vampire heart begin, felt power flood through her veins like lightning. Lucien held her through it all, whispering reassurances, anchoring her to the world. When it was over, she opened her eyes and the world had changed. Colors were brighter, sounds sharper, every sense heightened beyond measure. She could hear the court moving through the mountain, could smell the age of the stone around them, could feel the power humming in her own immortal blood. And when she looked at Lucien, she saw him truly for the first time, saw the ancient soul behind the beautiful face, the weight of centuries in his eyes, the love that burned brighter than any human passion could. "Hello," he said softly, smiling. "Welcome to eternity." She kissed him, and it was different now, vampire to vampire, equal to equal, perfect and right and home. The years flowed like water after that. Decades became centuries, and still Brenna and Lucien ruled the northern court together. They negotiated peace between humans and vampires, established laws that protected both species, built a world that was better and fairer than the one they had inherited. Brenna never forgot where she came from. Every winter, on the anniversary of her sacrifice, she returned to the Tithe Gate. The mayor's fraud had been exposed completely, the families compensated, and Hollowmere had slowly rebuilt its reputation. The gate itself had been torn down, the stone repurposed. In its place stood a monument, a simple marker listing the names of the 23 girls who had been sacrificed to a lie. And beneath those names, an inscription that Brenna had written herself. They were sent to die. We remember them by living freely. Lucien always came with her, standing beside her in the winter darkness as she read the names aloud. A memorial, a promise, a reminder that power could be used to protect instead of destroy. On their 50th anniversary, Casimir organized a celebration that lasted a week. The court was packed with vampires from across the continent, all come to honor the queen who had started as a sacrifice and become a legend. 50 years. Valentina said, raising her glass in a toast. "And you two are still disgustingly in love. It is adorable and nauseating in equal measure." "I will take that as a compliment," Lucien said dryly, his arm around Brenna's waist. "You should," Casimir agreed. "Valentina does not give compliments lightly." They danced that night, Brenna and Lucien, moving through the steps they had learned 50 years ago and perfected over decades. The court watched indulgently, these vampires who had seen so much, who had lived so long, still moved by the simple romance of two people who loved each other. "Happy?" Lucien asked, just as he had on their wedding night. "Always," Brenna said, and it was true. They had built something beautiful from the ruins of her sacrifice. A court that valued justice over tradition, a world where humans and vampires could coexist, a love that had survived and deepened and grown stronger with every passing year. The girl who had been chained to a gate in fury and terror was gone. In her place was a queen, powerful and immortal, standing beside the Vampire King who had seen her worth when no one else had. And in the centuries that followed, they would continue to build, to change, to fight for a better world. Together, always together, king and queen, equal and eternal. The sacrifice had become a sovereign, and the love that had saved her would last forever. On their 100th anniversary, they returned to the place where it had all begun. The pass where the Tithe Gate had stood was different now. The old stones had been broken up and reset as boundary markers, exactly as Lucien had promised the night he proposed. Between the markers, a treaty stone had been erected, inscribed with the agreement between the northern court and the human settlements, fair, equal, requiring no sacrifice from either side. It was spring now, not winter, and the mountains were green and alive. Brenna stood at the treaty stone and ran her fingers over the carved words, marveling at how much had changed. 100 years, she said softly. Lucien came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. The first of many hundreds. Do you ever regret it? That I was human? That you had to wait while I aged those first 2 years before turning? Never, he said fiercely. Those 2 years taught me patience I had forgotten. And you were magnificent as a human, Just as you are magnificent as a vampire. She turned in his arms to face him. He looked exactly as he had a century ago, pale and beautiful and ageless. So did she, frozen now at the age she had been when she turned. Eternal, together. I love you, she said. I will love you for all the centuries to come. I know, Lucien said, smiling. You tell me every day. And I will tell you every day forever. Promise? Promise. They kissed there, at the place where chains had once bound her and fear had once ruled. But there were no chains now, no fear. Only love, freely given, freely returned. Only two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. The village had tried to make her a sacrifice. The Vampire King had called her his queen, and she had become something more. A woman who had seized her own destiny, who had changed the world, who had chosen love and power and eternity on her own terms. As they walked back toward the court, hand in hand, Brenna looked up at the mountains and smiled. Somewhere in the vastness of immortality, there would be challenges and struggles, conflicts and compromises. But they would face them together, king and queen, partners in all things. The sacrifice was over. The future was just beginning, and it was theirs, bright and infinite and full of possibility, forever.